And in order to be able to apply that to our lives today, we should know the society that we are living in today also. Remember that Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, lived in a tribal Arab society filled with wars and anger and aggressive behavior, revenge and intolerance and ignorance. And today we are living a totally different society. Yes, we have aggression, we have some ignorance, but we are living in a globalized society, the globalized world, a big village of humanity, where the events on one side of the world will immediately affect and be known on the other side of the earth. Within seconds, we know what happened and how it's going to affect our lives, and there is a reaction to that on the other side of the world. We are living in the third millennia, 21st century, where not only news travel in seconds through all across the world, but a lot of geographic boundaries have been weakened. People are more connected to each other, and a lot of religious boundaries are also weakening. And while some 30-40 years ago or before, all the followers of each faith were trying to enforce their viewpoints on the other faiths, but now, as you may be aware, we are having more and more dialogue between different cultures and faiths, interfaith meetings, and all are happening especially in the past 20 to 30 years. Because the followers of different faiths, I'm talking about the intelligent followers, not the radical extremists of each faith, which probably they have not changed much. But the intelligent, reasonable, and people who are acquainted with knowledge and reason of the followers of all faiths, now they are more involved in dialogue and trying to learn from each other and to complement their learning by communicating with followers of other faiths and learning from them, as if we are all searching the truth, and the truths are always complementary to each other rather than contradicting to each other. So in the globalized village of humanity, all connected to each other, is more dialogue, more negotiation, and more understanding than maybe decades ago and centuries ago. So our society in many ways has changed, has evolved, and is different from the society where Prophet, peace be upon him, lived in, where people were in a purely tribalistic mentality and behavior, desert life, harsh situation. Their lives were filled with wars, disagreements, contradictions. I would like to quote a sentence from Imam Ali in Nahj al-Balagha, his book, where he says, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, came in the best land. What did he mean with best land? Meaning that the land of Kaaba, Mecca, where the first house to worship God was built by the great prophet Abraham, peace be upon him, and his son Ismail. So Imam Ali says in Nahj al-Balagha, Muhammad was born in the best of land among the worst of the people. People who had an upside down lifestyle, ma'kus, upside down. Their days were nights and their nights were days. They had not much to eat. They had not clear water to drink. Their lives were filled with war and hatred and killing each other, tribalism, and the best ornament to the eyes were the tears. So Prophet Muhammad came in such a people who were arrogant, ignorant, tribal, prejudice, and filled with revenge. You kill one from my tribe, I will kill 100 from your tribe. This type of aggressive, very aggressive mentality. So what happened in that society definitely would affect some features of Prophet life himself and his dealing with the society. Indeed, at the same time that Arabs of the time of Prophet, peace be upon him, were living in such a very primitive lifestyle and environment, as Imam Ali described. They were very advanced, more advanced cultures like in China, in India, in Iran, in Greece. You remember we had, before Prophet Muhammad, we had in Greece, we had Bograt, Socrat, Aristotle or Aristu, Socrates, Hippocrates, and we had all these great minds of their time, the greatest thinkers and the founders of rational and intelligent thinking of the past in the Greek culture. One could ask that how come Prophet, peace be upon him, didn't come among such civilized and cultured environments? That is also a miracle. Because in retrospect, if Prophet Muhammad was in a society where before him Socrates and Hippocrates and other great minds were there, one could have said, in a society that could raise into the Socrates and Bograt, Socrates and Hippocrates and those great ones, so he was maybe 100 years ahead of them. Maybe he was smarter than his predecessors. So that was not a big deal. He was just a smarter guy. But when he comes among such a primitive people and primitive society of Saudi Arabia of his time, it's a miracle. After 1400 years, this man, who came among the most primitive people, who could even bury their daughters out of the arrogance and ignorance, gave teachings that after 1400 years they still revive people, they connect them to divine, they give meaning to their lives, they are the best backup for the moral values. And still we can learn from him and we can be revived and enlightened. So that shows how miraculous he was, that he was not just a smart man in his society, but he was indeed connected to a world which is unseen in our eyes. His eyes were open to the unknown of the universe, to divine, and he was teaching us what he was seeing behind the scenes through revelation. So maybe that was a wisdom that he would come in such a primitive society. But at the same time, remember that, as Quran teaches us, قُلْ إِنَّمَا أَنَا بَشَرٌ مِثْلُكُمْ يُوحَى إِلَيَّ. Surah Sajda or Fussilat, verses 6. O Prophet, tell them that I am a human being like you, with only one exception. I receive revelation from divine. Emphasizing that he was a human being. He was not a light, he was not something that the whole creation was made for him, like some pre-existing entity and then for him the whole creation was made. No, he was a human being. He had all the features of any human being has. He would become angry, he would become thirsty, hungry, he would get tired, he would get sleepy. When his son died at age 4, like any other father, he sat and cried. He would fall in love, he would love women, and he never was shy to say that, because he was a human being. Like you and me may have a lot of desires and hide it, because we are afraid. We are not comfortable with ourselves. But peace be upon him, he said, God has put love of 3 things in my heart. The love of atr, perfume, the love of women, and the love of the prayer. And indeed the prayer is the light of my eyes or my sight. So while he, in these verses, he did not deny that he is a human being and a man, as a matter of fact, he loved beauty. He called it perfume, beauty and nice smell, aroma. He loved women because he was a man. He didn't deny that. And then he advances us that, yeah, like you, I'm in love with this life, the beauty of the life, but you know, I also love even most praying and connecting to divine. So teaches us to advance us one more step, to love the beautiful features of life, but as well learn to love communication with divine and being connected and having our life having a meaning by connecting to divinity. In that case, we should emphasize that as a human being, he was affected by human conditions of the society that he lived in. Similarly, Quran says, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَا رَسُولًا إِلَّا بِلِسَانِ قَوْمِهِ. We did not send any prophet unless to the tongue of the society. This lisan or tongue or language also means the customs of the society. It's more inclusive than the mother language alone, but it's also inclusive of the customs of the society. So like any other human being, he was a child of his time and the customs and his society. He was affected by them, which reflected in some rules and regulations, in some of the actions. For example, for his time, when he was eating, he had to use his fingers, his hand. Of course, there were no spoons and forks at that time. But that was the effect or the effect of the time and geography and the condition of the context of his environment, which affected his lifestyle. Being a man in Saudi Arabia in a very hot climate, in a desert environment, the best fit clothes for him were some loose, white, long dress, the Arab dress or some Pakistani dress that we see these days. Not that there was anything sacred about that dress, but that was the best fit with that environment. Again, that was dictated by the conditions of his time, not necessarily to follow that. That doesn't mean that now every man who wants to really follow the footsteps of Prophet should have this Arabic white dress, long dress, because that was not sacred. That was just a condition of his time. That doesn't mean that we should eat with our fingers and hands. That was the condition of his time. He was speaking Arabic because that was his mother language. There is nothing sacred about Arabic language. If he was born in Iran, he would have spoken Persian, Farsi. If he was in Turkey, he would have spoken Turkish, or English, or French. So neither of these languages has any superiority or sacredness over the other. It just, when any prophet comes in any society, he has to talk the language of the people of that society. Otherwise, people will not follow him because they can't understand him. For the same token, Prophet Jesus, peace be upon him, spoke Aramaic or Chaldani because he belonged to that society, and that was a language that he knew. Or Prophet Moses, peace be upon him, spoke Hebrew because that was his mother language, mother tongue. So the language, a number of customs, the way you dress, the way you feed, the way you transport, and a lot of rules and regulations, they're all dictated in the context of the time and geography and people and the fabric of the society, the economy of the society that you're living in. We see the language of Quran is a lot about dealing and trading. Because why? Because Arabs did deal and trade with the communities outside. So many times God said, trade with me. For one good deed you do, I give you 10 times reward. For one bad thing you do, I'll only punish you once. So the trade language of reward and punishment, losing and gaining, again was dictated by the environment that the Arabs were used to the trade. So they could understand that. They had a lot of wars happening to them. So there's a lot of language of how to deal in a war. That, by the way, all the wars at the time of the life of Prophet Muhammad were defensive wars. There was no war to convert. All the verses in Quran, they say you can fight or you fight with those who fight with you. Not that you fight and kill them because they are not Muslim. There was never such a thing. It's always a defensive war. So in order to understand and learn from Prophet, I would like to divide his life into 4 stages and see what we can learn from each stage of his life. The first part of his life, the early life, was the first 40 years before Prophet, peace be upon him, became Prophet. So this is the stage of being a simply unknown person in Mecca, in Saudi Arabia. How did he behave when he was not a prophet, when he did not receive any revelation? What did he do? How did he communicate with people? How did we interact with society? The second part of his life was when he had become a prophet, and now he was in a minority group. The first 10 years of Bi'sat, prophethood, in Mecca. As a minority, they were tortured, they were pushed around, they were put into prison, they were put into exile. Some of them had to run away into Habasha, into Africa, out of fear of their lives, and then eventually, out of fear of their lives, they migrated to Medina. So how did he deal at the position of minority who was being persecuted? The third stage of his life, peace be upon him, was when he was in a position of power and authority and majority in Mecca, in Medina, sorry. So when he was a governor, the ruler, and the Muslims were ruling Medina, a society that had Christians and Jews and pagans, and now Prophet Muhammad was running the show. He was a statesman. So how did he behave with the minorities there? And finally, the fourth stage is when he came back with 10,000 powerful soldiers back to Mecca, where he was driven out. And now he had all the power and all the reason to revenge for all the things they had done to him, his family, his followers. Now the question was, at the position of power, to people who have been so bad and aggressive against him, how did he revenge? And did he revenge, or did he forgive them? So I'm going to briefly analyze each stage of his life and see how he acted and what we can learn. In the first stage, which is the time that he was just a simple person, unknown person in the society, or little known person in the society, a stranger, an alien before his prophethood, we know that his behavior was such that he was called by everybody as Muhammad Amin, Muhammad, the most honest and decent person. He was for a while a shepherd. Then he was hired by Khadija, the rich woman in Mecca, Saudi Arabia, who hired him and then eventually fell in love with him while Muhammad was 15 years younger. And Khadija, who was one of the richest, or maybe the richest woman, the most prestigious woman, the most powerful woman in Mecca, fell in love with this young man who was the most honest person and then proposed to him to become her husband. And Muhammad, who was not a prophet at that time, accepted the proposal and married Khadija at the age of 25 when Khadija was at age 40. So during these 40 years, he was respected by all people of the society, and he was known as the most honest and decent person in his actions and dealings with others. He was extremely smart and wise man. You all remember that when Kaaba, the Kaaba was destroyed by a flood. As a matter of fact, it has been destroyed maybe 12 to 15 times since it was built by Prophet Abraham, peace be upon him, and his son Ishmael. So at the young age of this man, Muhammad, the flood comes and destroys the Kaaba, which at that time originally it was rectangular, it wasn't a cube shape. So the Arab tribes who were not very rich, who were actually poor, they built it. There was an engineer architect who was a Christian architect, built the house this time in a cube shape to save some money from the rectangular shape that it was originally historically. And then there was an argument between the heads of the tribes, the chiefs, that who should put the black stone in it. It was this black stone that came from heavens, from the sky. And it had some sacredness in the cultures before Islam among the Arabs. So because they didn't want to get involved in a war, they said, okay, let's cool it off, and tomorrow we will see whoever walks in to the city, we ask him who should put the stone, and then whatever he said we could do. Tomorrow morning it happens that Muhammad Amin, Muhammad the most honest guy, walks in by accident. So they said, Muhammad, who should put the stone in the wall? See how wise he is. He puts his rope on the ground, puts the stone, the black stone, in the center of his robe and says, all the chieftains, the chiefs of the tribes, come and each of you pick up one corner of my robe and carry the stone all together collectively to the wall. And then he holds the stone and puts it into the wall and says, see guys, you all help each other to put this decent work on an action and to put the stone back to where it's supposed to be. So with his wisdom, he prevented war among the different Arab tribes. Again, that is what any wise man in the world should do, any wise woman in the world should do, to bring peace and to prevent agony and fight and too much excitement in the societies, and to bring peace and calmness, peacefulness rather than war and agitation. In the second phase of his life, when he was member of a minority which was persecuted, they were attacked, they were prisons, they were whipped. Some of them had to run away to Habasha, to Africa, in fear of their lives. Some of them died in the path to Africa. Many times Muslims will go to Muhammad and say, look, they are torturing us, they are insulting us, they are imprisoning us. They actually, for 3 years, they was in Shab Abi Talib, in a valley of Abi Talib, his uncle. They were in exile there. Sometimes they had no food and they were eating like leaves and grass. So sometimes Muslims were so fed up that said, they are killing us anyway, let us defend ourselves, let us revenge, and at least we do something that we feel more comfortable. And even if we are killed, doesn't matter, because of all the insult and the pressure and oppression they are putting on us. And each time they wanted to revenge with anger and with force, the ayah verses will come, patience, vasburu, be patient, calm down, cool it off, pray to Allah, improve your communication with divine, give meaning to your lives and to your sufferings. Pay zakat, do charity work, and do your prayers, and be muttaqi, have taqwa. Taqwa means have a break on your emotions, so that when you get pressured and wiping out and sort of want to blow up and do something out of anger and hatred and emotions, learn to self-restrain. That is vasburu, sabr and taqwa, and self-control. So for the 10 years in Mecca, with all the persecution against them, only thing Muslims could do against all the oppression was to practice to be calm, cool, and patience, and not to revenge, not to fight, not to allow their emotions provoke them into harsh actions and to harsh revenge. All those 10 years. He was so well respected that despite every day going by the house of Kaaba and talking against the idols, they all respected him. His enemies respected him as the most honest person, although they didn't like his ideology. They offered to his uncle Abu Talib that we are willing to pay as much money to Muhammad so that he would stop his message, because he is ruining our business. And Abu Talib talked to Muhammad. Muhammad did not accept it, and he kept with perseverance his teachings. So he could not be bought by any amount of money, and he kept saying the message despite all the pressures against him. You remember that at this stage, when they were being oppressed, the story that whenever he was passing a road, somebody would throw his trash on his face and his clothes. Every day that was happening. For a few days that did not happen. He asked what happened, that this guy who always threw his trash on me hasn't been doing that for the past few days. They said, yes, Muhammad, he is a very sick man now, he's dying. He says, oh, let's go and see him and pay a visit to him. He enters his house. The man trembles and says, Muhammad, when I was healthy and strong, you never dared to come to me to punish me. Now that I'm dying, you are here to punish me? He says, no, I'm not here to do anything with the punishment. You always were having attention and respecting me as a matter of fact by noticing that I was going through your road, by throwing your trash on me. For the last few days I didn't see your attention, your paying attention to me. So I inquired, they said you are sick. I just came to pay a visit to you. And how are you doing, by the way? The guy was so ashamed of his actions. When he saw this high road that Prophet had taken, the high moral road, that rather than revenging and punishing him, actually, he came to visit him and to see if he can bring peace to him and take some of his pain away. He actually acquired Islam before his death, before his demise. See, when people act in a compassionate way, in merciful way, in a forgiving way, in moral way, that affects the society. No matter when they ask Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, what is the main message? He said, "Inni bu'istu li'utammima makarim al-akhlaq." The whole reason for my Bi'sat prophethood is to take to the highest peaks the high values of morality, ethical deeds. So he says the main reason for my prophethood to elevate the moral values. And then he acted so moral, so compassionate, so merciful that his actions affected others. So patience, perseverance, self-respect. He always said, I am Nabi, I am the prophet of God, I am a messenger of God, I am a deputy of God on earth. He had tolerance to others, even to his enemies. He acquired their respect, and he was compassionate even to his enemies. In the third stage of his life, when now he was in a majority, now he was ruling Medina, the first thing he did, he said, our community has Muslims, has Christians, has Jews, has Sabi'ins, the followers of John the Baptist, Yahya Ta'mid Dehande, and so these different, and the pagans, the idol worshippers. So let's come with an agreement how we want to live with each other. So the first civil law was written that we all protect each other, although we have different faiths, different ideologies, but we sign an agreement that we all protect each other. So if an enemy attacks the Muslims, the Christians and pagans and Jews should defend the Muslims. The same token, if an enemy attacks any of you guys, then Muslims have to defend you. So that was the first civil law which was written, that how people of different faiths in one community should act like citizens of the community with rights and with duties to protect each other. He was always present in society. When there was a need for him to rule, he accepted. He did not shy away. He did his duties as a responsible human being in a society, and he did it very wisely, very wisely. See the example that when he entered Medina with his followers, escaping from Mecca, some of the big tribal heads went and said, "Oh Prophet, please come and stay in our house, be our guest." It was very understandable to him. It was very easy for him to go to one of the big tribal chiefs and have a very luxurious life in his house till he would build his own house. But he knew that that tribal chief next year or 10 years later, would say that, you know, Prophet was in my house for a year or for a month, so I deserve this much respect or this much advantages from society. So what Prophet, peace be upon him, did out of wisdom was that he said, let the camel that I am riding choose where that we should settle down. So he let the camel go wander around, and the camel sat down, laid down in a garden, in a palm garden. And then so he said, okay, who this land belonged to? They said to a Jewish person. He said, okay, let's buy the land from him. And they built the first mosque, Masjidun Nabi, there, and he built his house there. So in that way, nobody could claim special privileges of having Prophet in his house. So his wisdom to share the honor and respect among people, and don't give special privileges to any group of people who would then claim it and demand special privileges from the society. One day he was in the Masjid al-Nabi, in the mosque, and some Christian priests were negotiating with him. It was apparently Sunday, close to noontime. Then he felt that they are uncomfortable. He asked, something is bothering you guys? They said, oh yes, Prophet, now is the time for our mass, to do our religious communion, Christian communion, and we are not in our church, so the time is passing. He said, that's okay. So he ordered the Muslims to leave the mosque so that the priests can do their prayer, perform the mass and communion in their own way, so that they can fulfill their religious duties in Christianity. So he was so respectful to their belief system, to their tradition and customs, that he and Muslims left out the mosque so that the Christians can do their prayers the way they wish to, rather than telling them, oh, you should all convert or do it my way. No, he let them do it their way, and he respected their way. He did not agree with their way in some aspects, but he did respect them. In all his decision makings, he always consulted people. And as you remember, Quran so many times says, وَشَاوَرْهُمْ فِي أَمْرٍ. In all aspects of life, consult people and respect the views of the people. So he respected, despite being prophet, receiving wahy, but in the actions in life, how do we do this, how do we do that, how do we run the city, he would always consult and listen to the wisdom of the community, and he would learn from the wisdom of people, especially in fields of their expertise that he did not have expertise. He was not a farmer, he was not an agriculture man, so he could learn from them. He didn't know a lot of areas. He actually sent Zayd, eventually became adopted as his son, but he was his slave. He was given to him as a gift before he became a prophet. So he sent Zayd to Iran and say, I have heard that Iranians are good masters in making sword and making things out of iron. Go and hire some of them to come and teach us how to deal with iron in better way and to make better weapons and better swords and better equipment for life. So he did admit that there are people in other cultures who have expertise that he and the Arabs of his time, they did not have those expertise. So he would hire them, to teach the community those special expertise present in other societies. And finally, at the time that he came back to Mecca after 8 years with the great power, 10,000 soldiers, very well weaponed, very well trained, very well disciplined, all equipped with the ideology of Islam, faithful, he came back to Mecca where they had driven them out 8 years earlier. They have confiscated their livelihoods. They had tortured them, they had killed them. Now with the Arab tribal mentality that now is time to revenge, and as a matter of fact some of his soldiers and army started to say, Al-Yawm Yawm al-Malhamah, now today is day of revenge and bloodshed because of all you people did to me. He suddenly said, Al-Yawm Yawm al-Marhamah, today is a day of forgiveness, mercifulness. And then he said, you're all forgiven. Go to your homes. Izhabu fantum tulaqa. Go to your homes. If you drop your swords, don't fight with us, there will be no bloodshed. Go home, those who fought to the last bullet, as we say today. You resisted us, you tortured us, you fought us to the last bullet, but now that you give in or you give up, there is no revenge. Go to Abu Sufyan's house, the biggest enemy of Islam and Prophet. Go to his house and you will be safe, because he was a respected man in Mecca. He didn't force people to convert, but he went to Kaaba house, the house of Kaaba. He said, this house was built by my great ancestor, Hazrat Ibrahim, peace be upon him, Abraham, and his son Ismail, for people to worship God in it. And so he cleaned up it from all the idols and statues that people worship. So he cleaned it up so that it will resemble the original house it was. But he never forced people to convert to Islam and to stop idol worshipping, because he strongly believed, as Quran says, La ikraha fi din. There is no compulsion in religion. You cannot force religion upon anybody. So throughout all the 4 stages, he always had self-respect. He always had best face in the society. Not that he pretended it. He had the best face. He was the most honest, the most respectful person. He was courageous. He never gave up his message. He could not be bought. He did not invite people to him, but he invited people to divine, to God. He was tolerant to others, and he was most compassionate and merciful. Even at the time that he could revenge, he forgave. So he did not abuse his power. As a matter of fact, he reminds me of Nelson Mandela, the guy in South Africa. After 25 years of being imprisoned and tortured, when apartheid was collapsed in South Africa and he was now the president, he forgave all his enemies, those white racist people. He forgave them, and as a matter of fact, he brought some of them into his cabinet, people who had put him into prison for 25 years. He had no hatred against them. So if you want to say who is following the footsteps of Prophet Muhammad, believe me, Nelson Mandela is following his footsteps much better than any Muslim this day and age is doing, because he did exactly what Prophet had done at his time. He forgave his enemies. He worked with them for the betterment of his society, for betterment of the community. Looking at another angle of the Prophet's life and what we can learn, I would like to now change again and look at it from another angle. Again, we have been taught by Quran that لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةً حَسَنَةً. Certainly you have in the Apostle of God an excellent example, an excellent role model. What does it mean? Let's look at it this way. A difference between the prophets and the smart scholars and philosophers and teachers, university teachers, is that the philosophers, theologians, scholars, when they talk about something, they start with definitions. You said, talk about human justice, for example. They start to say, yes, what is the definition of humanity? What is the definition of justice? What is a society? What is human interrelationships? And then they go step by step, more and more defining, and eventually coming with the final definition of, let's say, justice in society. And this is why, since they come with definitions, only a small elite, a small group of people can follow them, like their students. Not everybody could follow Socrates or Bograt, Hippocrates, or Aristotle. Only few people in the society could understand them, could understand the language, and could follow them. However, prophets came to speak to average people. They say, they came to talk to Awsat and Nas, the average of the society. So if society is highly philosophical, like Greece society, Prophet has to speak in a philosophical way that average person in that society understands. If society is very primitive, tribal, desert, war-ridden society, then Prophet has to speak not only their language, which would be Arabic or whatever language they speak, but also to the level of an average person, so that it will be understandable. Although they put different layers so that even 1,000 years later, people can penetrate into new dimensions and new layers of the teachings and still can learn new ideas. But nevertheless, the audience determines the level of the speech and how it should be spoken to them. So, contrast to philosophers and theologians who come with definitions, Prophet come with showing the average person how to live a righteous life, how to live a decent life, Islamic life or Christian life or Jewish life, by giving a good example to them. Let's say I want to show you how to build a house. I have two options. One is to draw a map of the architectural map of the house, a design. Then only somebody who is acquainted with the language of architecture can follow the maps and design and build a house. And that will work fine. But only 1% or less than 1% of society can follow that. However, when a prophet, peace be upon them, peace be upon him, wants to teach how to build a house, what he does, he builds a house and he says, oh people, come and watch me how I do it. Dig it up to the level of your waist, for example, then put mud and this and that to this level, and then bring some wood pieces and some pillars, and then put the ceiling. Look at me, do it exactly what I did. So an average person who is not educated, cannot read and write, who doesn't read how the structural designs are drawn, can look at the example of the prophet and follow it step by step and build a house. And then he would say to the later on comers that look at how this house was built and look at the appearance and try to build similar houses. So by the role model they can educate people, and this is how prophets are followed by masses of people versus philosophers and teachers by only an elite and a small part of the community. In other words, Prophet also says that نحن معاشر الأنبياء أمرنا أن نكلم الناس على قدر عقولهم. We the prophets have been ordered by God not to talk to people unless to the level of their understanding. So we have to reduce the level of our speech, of the talk, so that it's understandable by the average follower in the society, in the community. So now that we want to learn from the example of the Prophet, peace be upon him, we should dissociate certain features in the Prophet life that are not reproducible and are not meant to be reproduced by us. As the great scholar Shah Waliullah Dehlavi, the 18th century Indian philosopher, faqih and Sufi from Naqshbandi tradition, he said in his book Hujjatullah al-Baligha, he said that Prophet gave a good example in Medina to be learned from, not to be copied of. You know, a person may copy and may want to imitate it exactly the same way, and then it may not work. Because what was best in Medina at that time, 1400 years ago, in that society, economic fabric and social fabric, necessarily will not work in a different society which is more agricultural or which is very civilized, in New York or in far advanced economically and industrially. There is no rule and regulation that fits a tribal society as well as advanced economic society, industrial society, or agricultural society. So each have a different fabric, different economic conditions, different types of people interactions. So they need rules and regulation that fits them. So Shah Waliullah Dehlavi teaches us that the example of Prophet was not to be copied word by word or function by function, but was to learn from and then use the best wisdom to do the best action that fits with the society of where you're living in. There are 4 features in Prophet, peace be upon him, that we should dissociate and we should analyze them and we should understand them. One is the specific features of Prophet as a person. For example, he was Arab, he was a man. That doesn't mean that to be a man has something special, just it happened that he was a man. That doesn't mean that women cannot follow or they should convert to become men. So that part is special to him, and he was Arab, so he spoke Arabic. That doesn't mean that now on we should forget about our mother tongue language and all the Farsis, Persians, and all the Turks and all the English speaking and French speaking should all convert and speak Arabic. As I said, there is no sacredness in the language. The same token, the prophets before Prophet Muhammad spoke their mother languages. Nobody else spoke Arabic anyway. So the features that were specific to him as being a man, being an Arab man, being a tribal society, those are not to be followed and to be copied. The other feature is him as a prophet. He was ma'asum, otherwise infallible. He did not do mistakes, and he was receiving revelation. We cannot claim that we are in his shoes. We do not receive revelation the way he received, to have a new religion and new rules and regulations, and we are not ma'asum. We are not free from mistakes. So we should not, whether we are the religious leaders or society leaders, we should not by mistake think that we can follow his footsteps and we can rule and say that everybody has to follow me because I'm the ruler. No, as people who are fallible and do mistakes, we demand and we need the wisdom of the society, the shura, the common knowledge and understanding, and we should take advantage of the collective wisdom, and we should not rely on our own knowledge and our own single wisdom. Even Prophet, peace be upon him, who was infallible, ma'asum, and was receiving revelation, he always did shura, he always did consult people for all his decision makings. So we need that even more than he needed that. The third feature of Prophet is that his features as a leader, as a rahbar, leader. As a leader, he was not allowed to have certain things and he was allowed to have certain other things. For example, he was not allowed to say poetry. While poetry is actually an advantage, is good. It's good to be able to talk and to speak in a poetic language. We have Hafiz, we have Saadi, we have Rumi. These were great, respected people. There was nothing wrong by them for them having poetry. Imam Ali, for example, has a book of poetry attributed to him. Imam Hassan, Imam Hussein, they have poetry attributed to them. So to have a poetic language and be able to say poetry is an advantage to a human being. But for him as a prophet, it was forbidden. To the point that even if he would recite the poetry of somebody else, some of the Arab poets, he would break them in a way that they were not rhymic anymore. So he would break them out of the poetic sense. Why? Because he was already accused of being a poet, being just a better advanced poet than his predecessors in his society. And then poetry is always with some degree of imagination and feeling and thinking things which may or may not be real. And since he was receiving revelation, the question could have always been there, was it a real revelation or was it your imagination? As a poet, it could be a mix-up. There could be a mix-up between imaginations and the revelation. This is why Quran says, وَمَا عَلَّمْنَاهُ شِعْرًا وَمَا يَنْبَغِي لَهُ. We did not teach you poetry, and this is not at your level to say the poetry. However, Ali, Hassan, Hussein, his subsequent followers, they did say poetry with no problem. At the same time, he married a number of wives throughout his life. After Khadija died, after 25 years of marriage with her, when she died, he married a number of women, especially at the time that they were attacked and many Muslims were killed. After each war, he would order all the surviving soldiers to marry all the widows of the war, because with the society being so poor as they were, no social services, no insurance, no orphan houses, it was the duty of the surviving families and men to take care of the orphans and the women who now did not have any protection in society. So after each war, he would say, let's see how many men are dead and how many families are without any bread giver or bread bringer, and then he would say, okay, now let's go and marry them. It was after the Battle of Badr that some 70-some men were dead, and then he says, okay, everybody marry the widows, and then he himself marries 4 of them. And one of them was Salama, was so old that when his young wife Aisha asked, who did you marry today? And he says, oh, I married Salama, 4 women, one is Salama. She laughs, and she's almost going to faint. Prophet peace be upon him said, why are you laughing so much? She says, haven't you seen, she's such an ajuza, such a old woman with white hair, with old grown-up children. And then Prophet peace be upon him says, that's exactly why I married her. So that the other men realize that this marriage is not to enjoy these women, is to support their families. So no man could say, since he married 20 times in his life, and at one time he had 9 women in his house, who were the widows, and some were, after the wars, the daughter of a tribe or somebody would marry him so that they will bring peace between the 2 tribes, so that prevent further wars. No man, Muslim man, can say that, oh, I'm going to go follow his tradition. No, it is only unique to him. At his position, he was allowed to that, but at his position, he was not allowed to say poetry, he was not allowed to play music, while there is nothing wrong with playing music. Hazrat Dawood, the Prophet, peace be upon him, played flute, for example. But he as a prophet was not allowed to do that. So the question is, what areas, aspects of his life then we can follow? We cannot follow his specific features as the Arab man in a tribal society, as a prophet who was infallible, and as a leader who could and could not do certain things. But all the commonalities of the human beings that are beyond time and history and geography are things that we should learn from him. I'll just go over briefly some of them. For example, he never requested money or any privileges, special privileges for educating people of religion, God, and divinity. That is some important lesson we should learn, especially religious leaders, the mullahs, the sheikhs, the ayatollahs. They should learn that you cannot build the ceiling of your livelihood on the pillars of religion. Otherwise, you cannot expect to gain your livelihood through selling faith. Immediately there is a conflict of interest. If I talk about God and hereafter and prophets and the Quran, and try to lead and give guidance, divine guidance to people, but expect money from them in response to it, or in exchange for money, there's conflict of interest. Am I doing it because of my livelihood, or do I really believe in it? If I'm doing it for my livelihood, there is no more trust in me. As in my job title, so I sell religion, somebody else sells houses, somebody else sells lands, I'm selling religion. So you cannot trust me anymore. The work of religion, the teachings and guidance should always be free of charge, free of any expectation. It should be out of love and dedication to divine. Even if the person is tortured and his livelihood is taken away from him or her, he should still give the same preachings. And the preachings should not be in exchange for money, for power, for social respect, for political power, for nothing. It should be just for a love for truth and divine. Quran repeatedly says, اتبعوا من لا يسألكم أجرا وهم مهتدون. O people, why don't you follow these prophets who are not asking anything in response? They're just doing out of pure love. Or وما أسألكم عليه من أجر وما أنا من المتكلفين, Surah Al-Sad, verses 86. We don't ask from you any compensation, any reward, and we truly believe and have knowledge on what we are telling you. So why don't you follow? So teaching religion, giving guidance should not be expected to be compensated with worldly rewards. It should be free of charge. So this is a lesson that the religious leaders should learn, the mullahs and sheikh and priests and rabbis should learn. They should not guide for money. They should do it out of love. The other was compassion and loving of people. The prophets were in love to people for their livelihood in this earth and the life in the hereafter. There's a story about Prophet Moses that one day when he was shepherd, a lamb ran away from the herd, and then he ran all the day, and then in the night he was so exhausted, he caught the lamb and put it on his lap and said, "Oh, little lamb, you didn't care about my livelihood. Why did you do this to yourself? You exhausted yourself." So he cared about that little goat or lamb more than himself, his exhaustion. And suddenly, Rawayat says that a voice came from the heavens that this servant of mine is so compassionate to even a lamb and over himself that he deserves to be my prophet now on. So compassionateness was another feature of the prophets. Another thing was serving people. Prophet says, Sayyid al-Qawma khadimakum, the best of you is the one who serves people most. Or another place, habbu ibadillah ilallah anfa'uhum li'ibadih. The best, the most loved people in the eyes of God are those who serve his family, his people. And then he was asked, who are the ayalullah, who are the family of God? Prophet says, you guys on the street are the family of God, you are ayalullah. So the best in the eyes of God are those who help people most. He always invited people to God, not to himself. Quran says, فَذَكِّرْ إِنَّمَا أَنْتَ مُذَكِّرْ لَسْتَ عَلَيْهِمْ بِمُسَيْطِرٍ. Surah Al-Ghashiyah, verses 21. You only advise them, you only tazakkur, zakir, only tell them about the truth, about the good and bad, and let them choose. You are not to control people, you are not to impose yourself on people. That is another thing we should learn. And then he was always humble, he would sit in circles, he was never above anybody else. People will come in and say, which one of you is Muhammad? Mahaba Muhammad. And then he would raise his hand, I am Muhammad. So he was not sitting in a way, having a crown or having a big turban or something that people know him with distinction. He was just one of the people. He would take care of his own personal things. He would milk the cow for his own food. He would wash his clothes. He would take care of his personal things. He never imposed his needs, his things to others. There was a trip that he was going with some Muslims, and they decided to settle down and to make some food. So he started to bring woods for fire and build a fire. So all the followers said, oh Prophet, please, you sit down, we will take care of the issues. He said, you know, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُحِبُّ أَنْ يَرَى الْفَرْدَ مُتَمَيِّزًا بَيْنَ أَصْحَابِهِ. God does not want to see people distinguished among his companions. So he said, we all should work. We all are equal and all should take care of our share of the work. So these are the lessons we learned, that as a human being who was best in his society, he was always conscious of the needs of the society, was active participant of the society, was compassionate, was loving, was caring, was smart, was inviting to divine, not to himself, did not expect any money or any reward. These are the lessons we should learn, so that every day, inshallah, we become better human beings, become better moral people, become better role models for ourselves and for others. We live a better life and we provide a better environment for others to live and have a better life. So these are the lessons we should learn from him, peace be upon him, for our today life. I thank all of you for listening to this program. I wish you best. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh.